We all wish we lived in a mansion. That's why it's so strange that some people abandon them, but they do. And when those abandoned mansions are investigated, rather interesting things can be found in them. So often, in fact, this is our second video about it. These are the most incredible things found in abandoned mansions, too. Number 20. A body in a casket. Possibly the last thing you expect to find underneath an ordinary home is a casket, but it actually happened in San Francisco. Sure, it wasn't a mansion, but it's definitely a spooky story. Construction workers had been working on a San Francisco property in 2016 when they uncovered a coffin in the ground underneath the home. It appeared that it had been left behind when 30,000 bodies were moved to a memorial site in the 1920s. Rather than simply burying her where she was meant to go and moving on with their lives, the community came together to learn more about her. Garden of Innocence, a non-profit organization, spent an entire year finding out who she was and her story. They discovered she was Edith Howard Cook, a 2-year-old who died just 6 weeks from her 3rd birthday from marasmus, a name given to severe undernourishment. It was likely that she had suffered from a disease that her immune system couldn't fight. DNA helped the organization find living relatives, including her grandnephew. It was discovered that her father was a businessman and her grandfather was a member of the Society of California Pioneers. Edith's body was perfectly preserved within the coffin, and she was dressed in a white christening gown and ankle boots with small purple flowers woven into her blonde hair. Like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell right now, or this centipede will crawl on your face when you're sleeping. Now, it's time for the odd topic. Imagine just casually stumbling upon this much money. Well, one group of people didn't have to imagine. One abandoned mansion had been explored over and over again. It had become somewhere that teenagers and kids would break into and explore. It became a legend. But here's the thing, nobody ever entered the basement because the basement was locked. But a few years later, a professional team were sent to tear down the building. In doing so, they had to tear down the basement door and found this colossal stack of money when they did. Lucky devils. As always, comment down below with the hashtag OddTopic and let us know your opinion in relation to what we just showed on screen. That said, let's keep things moving. Number 19. The Waiting Cat. I don't think we give cats enough credit. Some people say they aren't loyal to anyone and just expect you to feed them and provide them with attention on their terms. But that might not be true if this story's anything to go by. Abandoned home explorers on YouTube known as Bros of Decay visited the abandoned home of a man named Mr. Alphonse. The house had sat untouched for many years, but it looked like he had just stepped out to go shopping and had never come home. His hat and coat were still hanging on hooks by the door, and a bottle of wine sat on the dining table. But those aren't the most incredible things found in the abandoned mansion. Once the YouTuber made his way into the master bedroom, he discovered Mr. Alphonse's cat lying on his bed where he would have slept at night. It was almost like the cat had not wanted to leave him and had simply returned to die as close to his owner as possible. Given the decomposition, the cat had likely been there for many years, and the cobwebs positioned on the ajar doors showed no one had visited the property either. Number 18. Rolls of cash. Many things can cause homes to become abandoned and fall into disrepair. The owners may not have had any family when they died, or they did have a family but didn't keep in contact with them for whatever reason. So when they die and authorities don't step in, that person's home can be left to rot away over decades. An abandoned house photographer known as Dave from Freaktography had heard about an abandoned home filled with antiques in Ontario, Canada. He paid a visit to photograph the antiques, but noticed a yellow bag rolled up behind the mattress of a bed while he was setting up his camera equipment. When he opened it, he found tightly packed rolls of Canadian and American banknotes totaling $6,800 from the 1960s to 1970s. Not wanting the cash to end up in the hands of looters and never once thinking of keeping it himself, Dave made it his mission to track down the family members of the property owners to hand over the cash. He managed to identify a female relative and called her to explain what happened and tell her about the money. She was nervous on the phone and said she would talk to her husband. Eventually, Dave met with the pair and didn't pry for family history. However, he learned the money most likely came from her grandparents' fruit stand. Number 17. Gold bars in a garden. A couple purchased a property in Rowan in 2002 and 7 years later found 6 gold bars in the garden. In 2013, they discovered 22 more. Both times, they say they found the bars by accident and had declared them to the mayor's office, police, and the Banque de France. It seems like they did everything right and that the bars were rightfully theirs. However, the couple ended up being involved in a criminal investigation when atypical financial operations were noticed. These came from the couple selling 23 of the 28 ingots and keeping the money. In total, the bars were worth around €800,000. It was during this time that the previous homeowners learned about the bars. They were 8 children and the seller's widow. They sued the couple for damages and compensation, and the courts ruled that the family had provided sufficient proof to claim ownership of the gold. The couple was made to return the ingots they hadn't sold, along with money from the sale of 15. In this case, the latest homeowners probably wished they had never found those gold bars in the first place due to all the stress they caused. Number 16. Pablo Escobar safe. Many people who purchase old mansions probably hope to find some treasure hidden from decades before. That's pretty much what Chicken Kitchen founder Christian de Boudoir got when he started tearing down a Miami Beach mansion previously owned by Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar. They had been filming the property's demolition for a documentary when they discovered a safe after knocking down the final walls on the massive 7,336-foot property. A piece of rubble had hit the foundation, which caused the floor to sink, and that's when they saw the large 2-foot by 2-foot safe that weighed up to 700 pounds. According to Christian, the safe was locked, and at that time, the contents were unknown. Even after Google searches, we've been unable to find what was in that safe. When it was uncovered, Christian thought it might be gold or diamonds. That guess wouldn't be surprising, given who owned the home. Pablo Escobar was the former Medellin cartel boss. He had such a tremendous amount of wealth that he started hiding cash in walls and secret compartments in his home. His property was seized by U.S. authorities in 1987, and attorney Roger Schindler purchased it for $915,000 for the government in 1990 before Christian took over ownership in 2014. Number 15. Prohibition-era whiskey. If something good came out of 2020, and we need every little bit of good news we can get, it was that a New York couple found almost 70 bottles of whiskey from the Prohibition era hidden in the floorboards and walls of their home. The property was built in 1915, and the couple, Nick Drummond and Patrick Backer, had been told that it was owned by a bootlegger. They had just thought it was a small-town legend, but that turned out to be pretty accurate. They had been living in the home for about a year before they decided to undertake major renovations. Nick started pulling off skirting along the bottom of the mudroom when a package fell out. He noticed hay everywhere, paper and glass, and then finally the package containing the whiskey.
Oh my god.
Unbelievable.
That's amazing.
They're perfectly wrapped.
Nick then realized the rumors were true. When he entered the mudroom, he discovered a hatch inside the floor where they found even more bottles. And that was just the beginning. 7 bundles consisting of 6 bottles of whiskey were in the wall. Then, weeks later, they found more bundles. All bottles of the Scottish whiskey called Old Smuggler Gaelic Whiskey were wrapped in tissue paper and straw before being bundled into half-dozen packages. Number 14. Bugatti in the garage. Dr. Harold Carr was an eccentric man with a love for cars. His family knew he was a little different, but they also thought he was a reclusive genius. In his later years, he became even more of a recluse, only ever letting his nephew inside his home. When Dr. Carr died at age 89 in 2012, he left his suburban lockup to his nephews and nieces, which they thought was just like any other ordinary property. Except it wasn't. The garage contained a wide variety of rare and expensive cars, such as Aston Martins and Jaguars. The most expensive of the lot was a 1937 Bugatti that could sell for over $8.3 million at auction. Dr. Carr paid just $1,238 for it in 1955 after it had been owned by the Le Mans 24-hour race winner Earl Howe and a member of the gentry, Lord Ridley. Dr. Carr's nephew, an engineer from Newcastle, said they were in shock. They knew he had cars, including the Bugatti, but they never knew how much they were worth. He said Dr. Carr was a generous man, but he kept to himself, so not everybody knew that. Number 13. Stash of guns. Abandoned homes can contain a whole lot of exciting things, but they're usually quite ordinary household items like antique knickknacks and cool furniture. What was found in an empty house in Westmoreland County was anything but ordinary. Neighbors to a dilapidated property heard items being broken inside the home when they called the police. When they arrived at the house, they found 3 juveniles inside from age 11 to 14 and 2 others nearby. But do you know what they also found? A massive stash of guns, like a flintlock muzzle-loader rifle, AK-47, a submachine gun, assault rifles, handguns, and more. There was also a considerable amount of ammo. It could have been a recipe for disaster, and it's lucky no one was hurt. Apparently, the children had been taking the guns to a tree house they built and playing with them. They also kept 3 handguns hidden in the tree house while leaving the rest inside the abandoned home. Police managed to track down the home's owner, who was a 93-year-old man in a local hospital. It's not known why he left the guns there for several years, but the juveniles would be facing charges. Number 12. The Thornbury Hoard. People in the UK are always so lucky. Because their country has such a rich history, you could be just going about your business and find something from thousands of years ago just buried in your backyard. In 2004, Ken Allen was digging a pond in his garden in South Gloucestershire, England, when he found a grey-ware pot in the ground. It contained 11 silver radiates and 11,449 base silver numi. The find was labeled as the 3rd largest in Britain. Research states the pot probably came from Caldecott in Monmouthshire, and it took 2 people to lift the bucket containing everything that had been within it, since it weighed about 63 pounds. Do they even lift? After a valuation committee got their hands on the haul, it had an estimated value of about $55,000. Some of the earliest coins in the Thornbury hoard dated back to the reign of Gallienus in 260, while the latest was from the Constantinian dynasty. If Ken were to get that money, which seems to be what happens in the UK, he'd be able to pay for that new pond and more. Often, the finder of treasure in the UK receives the value of the goods, while the treasure tends to go to museums. Number 11. Treasure from the past. Renovating old homes can be a huge undertaking. There are often so many hidden problems that you didn't expect to find. Sometimes, though, there is also hidden treasure. This can more than make up for all the hard work that goes into a renovation. A YouTuber called Ang Gru was renovating a house dating back around 100 years when they found a 14-karat diamond ring shoved into the crack of a wardrobe floor. They were removing nails to lay carpet when they spotted the ring and decided to lift the flooring to find what other treasures lay underneath. After lifting the beautiful old flooring, they just found old newspapers. But these were quite interesting since they dated back to 1932 and shined a spotlight on what life was like back then. But I can't help but talk about how they pried up the floor with a crowbar. If they took a bit more care with those old, valuable floorboards, they may have been able to sell them for more than what any treasure they found would have brought them. Typically, old flooring in good condition is desirable for repairs in other homes. Number 10. Tortoises. Radiated tortoises are critically endangered tortoises native to southern Madagascar. Their population is decreasing at an alarming rate, which is what makes the find in a home in Toliara, Madagascar even more heartbreaking. Police had received a report of a rancid smell at a two-story home in Toliara, so they turned up to see what it was. Inside, they counted 10,068 radiated tortoises that had been poached and looked to be destined for the Asian market, where their shell and star pattern made them sought after. Every room in the house was crawling with turtles, and the rancid smell was unbearable for police and wildlife officials. Wildlife experts think the tortoises were part of a pet trade, and 3 people were arrested in connection with it. More may have been arrested as the investigation continued. Once the tortoises were removed, they were taken to local rescue centers. However, due to illness, malnutrition, and dehydration, 180 were dead at the scene and over 300 died upon being rescued. They would be kept in captivity until healthy enough for release. Even more frustratingly is that poaching for the black market is anticipated to wipe out at least a third of the world's tortoises and freshwater species within the next 2 decades. Number 9. A classic painting in an apartment. There's nothing more intriguing than being able to explore homes that haven't been touched in decades. It's almost like stepping back in time, but with a lot more dust. An apartment in Paris was left untouched for over 7 decades until it was finally discovered. The owner, Mrs. de Florian, chose to leave Paris just before World War II broke out in Europe. Instead of packing up, selling her home, and leaving, she simply closed up the home and set off for the south of France. She never went back. 70 years later, Mrs. de Florian died at age 91, and her heirs enlisted the help of experts to make an inventory of her assets. This is when the Parisian apartment was finally discovered and explored, and what was inside was simply incredible. It was full of gorgeous furniture, piles of love letters, and a stunning piece of artwork hanging on a wall. It was by Giovanni Boldini, an important Paris painter, and the person in the artwork was Mrs. de Florian's grandmother. The painting ended up selling for $3 million, and the incredible family story may have driven up the price. Number 8. World War II era mortar. In 2010, the DeForests were excited to be moving into their new home at 1922 Beckner Street in Goshen, Indiana. But when they were putting away their possessions, they found something tucked away in a cubby space in the basement. A live mortar round. Linda DeForest discovered the foot-long ammunition and asked for confirmation of what it was from their family friend and honorary son, Joshua Blankenship.
She sees this Japanese lettering on it.
Joshua had just returned home from Iraq with the U.S. Army, so he knew exactly what he was looking at. Joshua told them not to shake or move it, as he believed it was around for a recoilless rifle or a lightweight anti-tank weapon. It was old, and no drill holes in it meant it was likely active. Police arrived with the Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit, and they were able to successfully remove the mortar without any problems. After the police left, the DeForests checked the rest of the house to make sure no other dubious items that threatened to blow up their home were hiding anywhere. Joshua said he knew that people like to collect disarmed grenades and expended munitions, but he doesn't like that kind of stuff as souvenirs. Number 7. A surgery room. It probably doesn't get much creepier than an old surgery room, almost like a time capsule, sitting abandoned with everything still inside. Dr. Anna's house, which no one knows how it gets its name since no one called Anna seemed to have lived there, was a medical surgery room and home to a doctor and his wife. Dr. K owned the property with his wife, and Dr. C also worked within the surgery room. It was abandoned for 15 years, but still contained all their medical items and belongings. The lower 2 floors of the home had an operating room, examination rooms, storerooms, a library, and waiting areas. Many of these rooms were prepped and ready for patients, with vials and syringes prepared for use. The upper 3 floors were the living area, and the type of furniture and home style suggests Dr. K and his wife were quite wealthy. One room even featured a beautiful Steinway grand piano. But it's the medical areas that'll really creep you out and amaze you at the same time. Everything is still set up as if it were a surgery room in a horror movie. There are even jars of human kidneys on display, preserved in formaldehyde, along with a massive library of books on urology. Number 6. Snake House. If you have ophidiophobia, the extreme fear of snakes, now's the time to go do something else. This story is truly horrifying. The Sessions family of Ben and Amber had been looking to purchase a larger home for their growing family in Idaho when they managed to find a 5-bedroom rural home for a little over $100,000 that seemed perfect. It was also a bargain. Locals in Rexburg called it the Snake House because apparently it sat on a nest of garter snakes.
There are snakes everywhere, all along the foundation, in the basement.
It also has a history of homeowners leaving quickly. When they spoke to their real estate agent, she claimed the story about snakes was made up by the previous owners so they didn't have to pay their mortgage. So they signed for the house and acknowledged the stories about the snakes within it. But they weren't just stories, they were reality. The day they moved in, they saw 8 snakes. They could hear them in the walls with their scales brushing up against drywall, and the water tasted like the odor of the snakes. Amber said it was like living in Satan's lair, and they moved out 3 months after moving in, feeling compelled to claim bankruptcy to get out of their mortgage. You can actually view video footage on YouTube from the previous owners showing buckets spilling over with snakes in the house. Number 5. Abandoned House in the Woods. Keith Dotson from Shadows and Light is a fine art photographer who often explores some pretty cool places. One such cool place was an abandoned house in the woods. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's kind of late to go swimming, but you know your mama, she's one of those No, I'm just kidding. Now, I know what you're thinking. Are you insane? Don't go in there. This is how all horror movies start. But the good news is, there's a complete video tour on YouTube of the abandoned farmhouse, so clearly nothing bad happened while Keith was exploring it. It sits in the middle of nowhere in a terrible state, and Keith wasn't able to find any history about the place, including who lived there and who owned it. That's a shame, because it'd be nice to see what it looked like before it fell into such a bad state of disrepair. And that's a bit of an understatement. The property didn't even look safe to enter. It was far from watertight and had fragments of wood everywhere. A lot of the house's cladding was also missing. It looks like a small, single-story home from the outside, but it's surprisingly spacious once you're inside. There are even stairs leading up to a second story. The house also contains remnants of old furniture, such as a spring from a mattress and doors lying on the ground. Number 4. Murder Mansion. Often, the abandoned mansions and traditional homes you come across are decades old, dilapidated, and not even worth saving in some cases. But that's not true for all homes. An urban explorer was exploring a wealthy neighborhood, scouting out new abandoned home opportunities when they noticed a mansion with a driveway that hadn't been cleared for the entire season. This is generally one of the many signs that a home is abandoned. The explorer ran up to the house, saw other apparent signs of abandonment, and went inside to take photos. The home was built in the 1960s with dated and original decor in place, a bright and large kitchen, and plenty of tidy rooms that made it look like the house was simply left by its owners for an extended vacation. The explorer didn't go into detail about what he found out about the house to stop other people from going there, but there must have been a reason he's called it Murder Mansion. The home was put up for sale, but it didn't sell, likely because of its history and what happened to the wealthy family who lived there. It has been left abandoned since. Number 3. Treasure Trove of Rare Coins. Jeff Beidelman of Rare Collectibles in Richland Township had been called into a home that had been unoccupied for 20 years. The former family members had died, and the children of the last occupants had asked Jeff to visit the house to look for collectibles. So he did just that. Jeff had been upstairs when he found a big pile of coins. He put them into a specific plastic bag to drag downstairs, and it was while he was going downstairs he noticed a hole in the wall. The hole looked strange, so he asked the daughter to see if she knew anything about it. According to the daughter, there were family rumors about coins being dropped down the hole, but no one had confirmed if they were true or not. They were. Jeff tapped the first floor wall below the hole and heard the sounds of coins. When he opened up the wall, it had been so under pressure by the coins that they started rushing out. The cash that had been sorted so far aged from 1826 to 1965, including seated Liberty dimes and large cents. So far, they had a catalog value of $8,500, but some were minted, so some coins with a face value of 1 cent could be worth as much as $20. Number 2. Paintings in a garage. Thomas Schultz and Lawrence Joseph purchased a home in 2007 in Bellport, New York that contained tens of thousands of paintings. The artist, Arthur Pinagian, had left instructions for his paintings and journals to be sent to the local landfill when he died, but his family members never did. Instead, Thomas and Lawrence purchased the works from the family for $2,500 and decided to restore and frame them. According to New York art appraiser and historian Peter Hastings Falk, the collection could be worth as much as $30 million. In fact, some pieces had already sold for $500,000. The rest of the paintings, with new frames, can be viewed at Gallery 125 in Bellport, which is owned by Thomas. Thomas also lives in the cottage with his family. Could you imagine being the family members who sold the art for a measly $2,500? On the one hand, they got $2,500 more than they would have if they had followed Arthur's wishes, but on the other hand, they cheated themselves out of millions of dollars. They aren't likely to forget that loss in a hurry. Number 1. Abandoned farmhouse treasure. A Tennessee man found a life-changing amount of treasure under the carpet of his grandparents' farmhouse, which had been sitting abandoned for many years. The man's grandparents had to leave the house when his grandfather fell ill with cancer and they needed to be closer to healthcare providers. The farmhouse was in a remote part of Tennessee with fields for miles and miles. His grandfather died and his grandmother never returned to the farmhouse, which sat forgotten about for years. Once both grandparents were gone, the man decided to go to the old house, clean it up, and sell it. It was during this cleanup process that he uncovered what appeared to be a type of time capsule in the floor dating back to the 1930s. It contained books, water-damaged money, silver bars, and coins. He also discovered a box with lots of precious items like coins and jewelry. The family then found a safe built into the coffee table, which contained money, rare notes, and his grandfather's pistol collection. The entire haul was likely worth thousands of dollars, but it's unknown if the family decided to keep or sell what they had found. After seeing just how many goodies are tucked away in abandoned properties, I almost wish my family owned an old abandoned mansion to explore. Have you ever found anything incredible in an old home your family owned? If so, what was it? Also, check out our other cool stuff showing up on screen right now. See you next time!